Okay guys, welcome to week 3. We're sort of getting into a bit of the nitty gritty now, so this is very exciting. We've done a lot of work so far where we've laid the foundations for our project. We talk about some very foundational concepts like the minimum viable product, asset packs, and we've done some great work planning the sort of the foundation for our game, like the roots, like the emotions that we want to explore and so on. So today what we're going to get into is the project setup. So we're going to start actually preparing our engine. So just a recap of last week, the last thing that we did was plan our minimum viable product. This week we're going to do our project setup. And so immediately after this week, or even during this week, we're going to be able to start executing on that minimum viable product and start to actually piece together a game that we can then package and start to distribute to people as soon as possible so that we can get some playtesting done. So what we're going to cover in this week is I've got a separate video which I'm gonna link to you in the slides here that I want to get you to follow, where I'm going to go through some of the stuff in the engine. But basically in that video we're going to cover project setup. We're going to cover setting up a GitHub repository so that you've got backups and you can recover your data if it gets lost. It's an artist friendly tutorial. It's not using hectic lines of code or anything like that. Because source control, it's a headache for me even, and I spend a lot of time in blueprints and sort of think of myself as a bit of a programmer, but all this source control stuff can be like quite overwhelming and like unfamiliar to me, so I'm going to try and make that easy today and show you how to do that. We're going to talk about having an exit strategy so that you can package your project at any time and have it ready to be distributed in case, you know, something happens or you decide that you don't want to work on it anymore and you want to start something new. It's good to have an exit strategy so that you don't have a half-baked project there on your computer in case you need to stop development. It's very difficult to get back into a project if it's sort of left half-baked because you need to pick it back up and then you don't know where things are, and you know there might be some errors that you've sort of forgotten how they got there, and etc. And so having an exit strategy means having your game packageable at regular intervals and doing good documentation and things like that. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about development logs. We're going to talk about where to find help and where to find resources and seeing it through to the end and staying sane. That's going to be in a different chapter, I think, but let's just see how we go. So here's the video. Click that and make sure you watch that this week. It's going to be quite long. I think it's about 40 minutes and it might be a little bit intense. We're going to get in the editor and things like that, but that's your main task this week, is to just go through that, understand that. Maybe you need to watch it a few times and maybe you need to fiddle around with GitHub and just get your project going. If you have any issues with some of the stuff in this, post about it in the Discord server, and either somebody else in the server who has had experience with that, they could give you a hand. So give somebody a hand if you see them struggling, and I'm also checking in there as well so I can also help you out. But yeah, this week is quite important. So we're going to go through the packaging settings, intro movies, setting up the maps that are included in the package build, etc. Setting up a GitHub repo, integrating plugins. So like I said, using asset packs is good, using plugins is also good, and I'm going to link you to some plugins from my games as well later on my website. Everything from my store is 50% off for everybody in this course, but we'll talk about that later. I've got discounts for everybody in the course. We're going to talk about making reusable plugins. So something that you might want to do when you're developing is if you want to reuse some of the content that you make for one game in another game, it is good to make that as a reusable plugin because then you can just import it to your next game, and it's very easy. So this sort of future-proofs your work when you do them with the possibility of reusing them in the future in mind. It helps you save content on future projects, and eventually after you've been doing it for a couple of years like me, you end up with sort of a toolkit of different plugins that you've developed, and then basically every time you make a game it's faster and easier, and you've got all these tools at your disposal for quickly making a game. In this video, developing your own content, I'm not really sure what that means. I might just remove that. We're going to talk about packaging, and then I'm going to show you how to upload it to Steam as well. So that is using the Steam GUI, which is my little app down here on the screen, showing you how to actually do that because the documentation is fucking awful. And so once you've done that, do that first, and then we'll continue with the rest of this video. So So just a couple of other things that we're going to quickly talk about this week. Just the concept of pseudocode. So pseudocode, I like to think of it as like laying like a train track or something for a train to like come along. It's like you're preparing the ground for when you actually do the hard work. So pseudocode I've written here is a logical description of each thing that needs to happen in a blueprint execution chain in order to achieve a desired result. So that's a bit abstract, but what it basically means is writing it out before attempting to program it, so that you can wrap your head around it. On the right here, we've sort of got some DNA. I guess I must have put that there thinking that it sort of acts as a blueprint. It's like you lay the track with the DNA and then the code sort of forms around it. But so for an example here is, say if you want to make like a character launch ability, the first thing to think about is, well, how does the execution chain start? How does the character launch? Well, the player inputs a key. So that's the first step of the pseudocode, is the player inputs the Q key. Then the next thing, is the player on the ground? Only launch if they're on the ground. Then the next thing, you need to get a reference to the character movement component, because that's how you tell it to launch. Then the next thing, you're going to add launch velocity to their character movement velocity. So again, just the logical next step. You're going to get their velocity, which comes from the character movement component, which is in the previous step. And then to that velocity, you're going to add the launch velocity. And then after that, you're going to spawn any multicast effects, video effects or whatever. You could also add like a cost in here, like maybe they need to pay a resource or something. But basically, you want to write out all the steps like this, and then basically these are the nodes that end up being used in the code. For simple stuff like this, you might not need to think about this, but for more complicated things, this really helps. It helps you wrap your head around what's going on, think clearly, and then you can do a good blueprint code without it being just a jangled up mess where, you know, you've done unnecessary work or done like a convoluted way of doing things. And so your task now is to do... I don't want it to be like that. I want it to be like this. Do pseudocode for one or more of your blueprint features. Ideally, do it for all of them. But it isn't always possible to do it for all of them this early, because you might be still a bit unsure about some of the elements of your game. So this week, maybe just start with one. And then I think the next step, or somewhere in the check-in, we're going to get you to actually do that this week. So write blueprint code for one of your blueprint features. So here are some questions to ask. How does the execution chain start? Everything starts with an event. So whether that's an input, a character overlap, event tick, begin play, or from like an event dispatcher, like the player has saved the game, or the player has I don't know, achieved like a certain score, or the timer has hit a certain time or whatever. Everything needs to start with an event. So think about it. What is the event that causes this execution chain to start? That's the first step of the pseudocode. Then what is affected by the event? For example, the character. And then how are you going to get a reference to that? So if it's an overlap event, for example, off the overlap event, you have a reference to the overlapped actor. So you just drag off that pin and then you say, oh, we can launch, or we can destroy them, or whatever. But in more abstract cases, you need to think, okay, well, who's affected by this and how do I get a reference to them? Again, this is abstract. You'll learn this from experience. What happens to them? So maybe you reduce the health, check if dead, spawn some sounds or whatever. Oh, and then here we've got feedback. So then what is the feedback to indicate something has happened? So here you might change a variable. You might, reduce the health or buff them or launch them or whatever. And then you need to add feedback as well. So sound effects, particle effects, and things like that to let them know that something has happened. So this is all things to think about. Here are some best practices, which I've talked about in the video. So leave comments on your code. Very helpful for you to read when you revisit. Just don't go overboard. Don't do too much, because then you don't actually get anything done. Make reusable plugins and back up regularly. All stuff I covered in that video. And here on the right, we've got some Dr. Seuss stuff here. This is how your code ends up looking to you after you've taken a bit of a break. If you don't comment it or make some sort of effort to keep it organized, it can just look like this big confusing like Rube Goldberg machine where you're not sure how the fuck it works. So do yourself a favor and try to keep somewhat organized. And we cover the folder structure in the video as well. So build with the exit strategy. This is something else that I've talked. You want to package as soon as possible and package regularly to make sure that there are no problems. This is good because it lets you play test, and also because you can address bugs early on. And then also obviously figure it out as you go. You're not going to know in advance how to do your pseudocode and whatever, so don't analyze it too much. Ride the waves of inspiration when you've got them. So for example, if you're enjoying developing something that's not particularly on your MVP or whatever, just roll with it. Like, I think how you feel about your project is probably the most important thing. And so when you've got that inspiration, and when you're feeling passionate and you've got love in your heart and you're enjoying yourself, that's what game development is about. It's about enjoying yourself. It's about having fun. And so when those waves of inspiration happen, take them and run with them. And it doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be part of the plan. Use the feelings as the compass, and then use the minimum viable product and the practical, logical stuff. Use that secondary. All of those plans, they're secondary to how you feel about your project. And this is a very important thing to remember. It's very easy to get stuck in this sort of rut of thinking about, oh my God, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, I've got to do this. And the game turning into this big slog where it's like you feel like you have to push through in order to get to your game. When in reality, a much better approach is to actually readjust your plans and think, well, okay, what am I actually excited to develop? What's meaningful to me? What is exciting? What is fun? What do I have energy for? And then roll with that. And then, redesign your plans based on that feeling. Very important. And figure it out as you go, so you can't see the end until you start. It's like that whole thing of don't focus on the staircase, just focus on the next step. It's like, what's the next step? Just focus on that. And then from that next vantage point, then you can see more. And then you can see more. And then all of a sudden, you'll be able to see the end of the project. And it becomes clearer. Like the path becomes clear by walking. That old thing. And then we're going to talk about some pitfalls later. So anyway, that's it for this week. Here's your list of tasks. Watch that video, set up your own project, import your assets, and have a play around with them. Do some prototyping and maybe do some blueprints. Do the pseudocode for at least one of your features. I'll put at least one. Do as many as you can. Begin developing it. See how it goes. See what works well. See what you need to learn. And maybe as you begin to develop, you'll be able to see more clearly how the rest of your blueprints are going to pan out, or the rest of your project is going to pan out. And then at the end of the week, this is very important. I'm going to put this one in bold. When you get to the end of the week, I want you to think about, what did you enjoy? What drained you? Think about what was hard. Think about what came easy. Think about the moments where you really felt like engaged in what you were doing, and when you fell into like the flow state, like when you lose track of time. What's the thing that makes you want to develop more? Reflect on that, and reflect on what drains you as well. What do you want to do less of, and what do you want to do more of? And share that in the server if you want. Maybe you could post a development log, completely optional. But this is a very important question that you need to, in order to succeed, in my opinion, and the thing that helps me the most is just remembering to ask this question regularly, and then readjusting the plans based on that feeling. That's how you survive as an indie game developer. So see how you go with those. Drop a line in the server if you want. And good job on making it to week 3, and we'll see you next week.